In this episode, we clear up some myths and dispel some concerns about the huge upcoming July 1st deadline for federal student loans. Let's get started. Are your student loan payments or loan balances a major obstacle in your financial life? Then tune in and let's escape student loan debt. Hello and welcome to another week of episodes. This is yet another episode where we are simulcasting or dual casting, whatever the right terminology may be, for our Escape Student Loan Debt and New Money, New Problems community. Now, I will tell you that if you have federal student loans in our New Money, New Problems community and you haven't checked out the Escape Student Loan Debt podcast, I have no idea as to why, but I encourage you to do so. Conversely, if you are an Escape Student Loan Debt listener and you have any general interest in finance, I think that you would appreciate the New Money, New Problems podcast, where on a weekly basis, we cover more broader topics when it comes to your general finances. So I'll put a link to both podcasts in the show notes so you can check it out if you haven't already. That being said, there are a number of topics we're going to cover today that will benefit people in both camps. And a lot of today's episode has to do with the advance of the July 1st deadline and a number of student loan changes that will be coming to federal student loans. I want to give you an overarching highlight of those changes in the first half of the episode. And in the second half of the episode, I'm going to issue some clarifications for things you might have heard, bust some myths for things that you might have heard that are inaccurate, or just provide some general details that you need to know before July 1st. I'm going to try to cover these changes. They're huge changes, but I'll try to do so as efficiently as possible. Let's start with Parent Plus borrowers. Parent Plus borrowers are people who borrow student loans on behalf of their undergraduate student children. Up to this point, if you are a Parent Plus borrower, there were no limits on how much you could borrow on behalf of your child. That's going to change. After July 1st, there's going to be limits, $20,000 per year, $65,000 in total per child. If you're a general undergrad student and you're borrowing for yourself, there have been limits in place for a number of years. However, there haven't been limits for people who are pursuing graduate degrees. There were Grad Plus loans that allowed them to borrow whatever they needed, even if that was $400,000, $500,000, if it covered the cost of schooling. That is changing as well. And if you are a standard graduate student, and I say standard with air quotes, you're going to be capped at $20,500 per year with a lifetime borrowing limit of $100,000. If you're considered a professional student, then you're going to be limited to $50,000 per year with a lifetime limit of $200,000. I have shared multiple times that I think that this is going to be devastating, especially for private colleges where it can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to attend. It's going to lead certain people to decide not to pursue degrees. It's going to lead others to lean on private student loans. And in my mind, I truly believe it's going to lead to a number of private institutions closing. That said, there's a group that's even more upset at these changes, and those are people who are pursuing graduate degrees in fields where they're not considered a quote-unquote professional student. If you're wondering what degrees qualify as a professional student, it is medicine, either MD or DO, dentistry, DDS, DMD, veterinary medicine, pharmacy, so a PharmD degree, optometry, so an OD, podiatry, a DPM, chiropractic medicine, a DC, law, a JD or an LLB, theology, an MDiv or an MHL, and clinical psychology. Now, there may be a degree or two that I'm missing, but generally, if you're in one of those fields, you're considered a professional student. You can borrow $200,000 lifetime. Anybody that's not in one of those fields, you're going to be capped at the $100,000. Now, we'll share more details about this after the break, but that's something that you need to know going into July 1st. Now, let's talk about the actual repayment of these federal student loans. We've covered in past episodes that right now there are certain income-driven repayment plans that are eligible to all borrowers. There's the income-based repayment plan, there's the pay-as-you-earn plan, there's the income contingent repayment plan. What's coming before and after July 1st is, starting July 1st, there's going to be a new repayment plan available under that umbrella, the Repayment Assistance Plan. If you do not borrow a new loan on or after July 1st, you'll be able to choose between the Repayment Assistance Plan and any of the previous options that I just mentioned. However, between now and July 1st, 2028, the pay-as-you-earn plan and the income contingent repayment plan at some point are going to be phased out. And for existing borrowers without new loans on or after July 1st, after that point, they will only have options of income-based repayment or repayment assistance plan. After the break, we'll cover why I'm being so specific with my language. But to restate that, if you are an existing borrower and you do not take out another loan on or after July 1st, you'll always have access to the income-based repayment and repayment assistance plans. Sometime between now and July 1st, 2028, you will lose access to ICR and pay-as-you-earn. Along those same lines, for Parent Plus borrowers before July 1st, if you had a Parent Plus loan that you were trying to repay, there was a process that you could go through to make sure that those loans were eligible to be paid towards using an income-driven repayment plan. And if you worked at an eligible employer, you being the parent, and an eligible employer is a nonprofit or a government entity, you could also pursue public service loan forgiveness with Parent Plus loans. After July 1st, that changes. If you have not made certain changes to your existing Parent Plus loans before July 1st, you are going to lose access to the income-driven repayment plan and public service loan forgiveness, meaning anything that you take out would have to be repaid in full. However, it's important to note that if you borrow a new Parent Plus loan on or after July 1st, even if you've done what I just said, you still lose access to income-driven repayment plans and the public service loan forgiveness program. Next up, the SAVE plan. There are literally millions of people who signed up for the SAVE plan when it was introduced. It was the lowest by a good margin option under the income-driven repayment plans umbrella. A number of those millions of borrowers have been in forbearance for several years while they waited to hear the fate of the program. The fate has now been decided. The SAVE plan is ending, and there is a deadline that has been attached, which we'll cover in more detail, of July 1st. July 1st is not the date by which you have to have a new plan. It's the date that starts the timeline that you have to choose a new option. So it's a 90-day window starting July 1st, where if you're currently still on SAVE forbearance, by the end of that 90 days, you had to have chosen a new plan. Another element of this July 1st deadline is there are certain people who have older student loans that are not eligible for a number of different repayment plan options. Those loans are loans like Perkins loans or Stafford loans. If you have a loan like that and you're trying to become eligible for a wider range of income-driven repayment plans, you also have to have applied and have your newly consolidated loan disbursed before July 1st. And lastly, starting July 1st, if enacted, and I'm being very specific with my language, we'll cover after the break as to why. If enacted, for those pursuing public service loan forgiveness, the Education Department is attempting to institute a new rule that would allow them to disqualify certain employers from being eligible for public service loan forgiveness. This essentially is them saying that there are certain nonprofits out there, for example, who might be helping with immigration reform, that are offering a service that is counterintuitive to the president's objectives. And if that's the case, or they're found to be doing something that they consider illegal, and that's important, they consider illegal. This is not the courts. This is not Congress. This is just the Department of Education. They would have the right to say that any employees under that nonprofit are not eligible for public service loan forgiveness. If that is enacted as intended, that rule would also start on July 1st. Those are some of the major updates. After the break, we're going to talk through some of the fine details of these updates and things that you may have heard that may have been accurate, updates that provide more clarification, or some general sources of comfort that I might be able to provide. And we'll be right back after the break. All right, back from the break, and it is time to dispel some myths. The first myth is that if you need to consolidate your student loans either to be eligible for an income-driven repayment plan or as a Parent Plus borrower to preserve your eligibility, all you have to do is apply for consolidation before July 1st. That is not accurate. In reality, you have to apply and have your new loan consolidated and that loan disbursed before July 1st. So if you have 4 or 5 different loans of $20,000 each, they have to take all of those different loans, put them together, and issue the newly consolidated loan all before the deadline. That is extremely problematic if you haven't already put in your application, because it can take 4 to 6 weeks to consolidate a federal student loan, and there are tens of thousands of people who are doing it in advance of this deadline. So on the day that you're listening to this, if you haven't already done it, you are already behind the 8 ball. Like, you need to be actively applying for consolidation as we speak. And in reality, there's still a huge chance that it won't be dispersed in advance of the deadline, but it's better than not trying at all. So if you're sitting there thinking, oh, I got this calendar or this timer on my phone that just says on June 30th, I need to put in that consolidation application, incorrect. You have to have it consolidated and dispersed in advance of the deadline. The next myth has to do with Parent Plus borrowers who are trying to preserve that eligibility. They're trying to make sure that they keep access to income-driven repayment and public service loan forgiveness. And in years past, in order to take a Parent Plus loan and position it to have access to the most beneficial income-driven repayment plans, you had to do it through a process called the double consolidation loophole. We're not going to spend a ton of time on that loophole, but there are people out there who think they still have to go through that process, which takes many, many months in order to preserve their eligibility. That is not the case. You no longer have to do the double consolidation. What you have to do in order to preserve your eligibility is if you have a Parent Plus loan that has not already been consolidated, you have to consolidate it. And as a reminder, you can consolidate one federal student loan, as odd as that may sound. After you've consolidated, you have to make one payment on the income contingent repayment plan. And after you've made that payment, then you can switch to any of the available income-driven repayment plan options. The next myth is that even those who aren't Parent Plus borrowers should consolidate their loans just in case in advance of the deadline. That is a horrible idea, and I will explain why. If you have the right type of loans, and the right type of loan is a direct loan, and anybody who borrowed after like 2013, you already have direct loans. It's the people who are a little older who are kind of in that land of in between. But if you already have direct student loans, you don't have to consolidate. You can have access to public service loan forgiveness. You can have access to income-driven repayment plans, even if you have 20 different loans, as long as they're direct loans. The reason it's dangerous to consolidate is if you have all these separate loans, let's go back to the example I just gave of having 20 different loans, and you're paying towards them using income-driven repayment plans, you're getting credit. Definitely towards forgiveness under those plans. And if you work for an eligible employer in terms of public service loan forgiveness, you're getting public service loan forgiveness credit as well. As the regulations stand right now, when you consolidate those loans into a new loan, you lose all of the credit that you previously accrued towards those disparate loans. There were a few years where this wasn't the case and they didn't take away your credit before consolidation, but we've gone back to the old rules. And in those olden times, I would have people who came to me after working at an eligible employer for 8 years. They thought they were 2 years away from public service loan forgiveness, but before they met with me, they consolidated their loans, and I had to tell them, hey, you got to start all the way over at year one. You don't want that circumstance, so don't think that you have to consolidate or that it's the safe bet. If you're not a Parent Plus borrower, if you're not somebody who has old loans like Perkins loans or Stafford loans, which are more restricted, do not consolidate your loans just to be safe. It's likely that you're just fine, and if you do consolidate those loans, you risk wiping away years worth of credit with nothing to show for it. The next myth is going to take us back to the SAVE plan to cover more details about what we talked about before the break. As we covered before the break, if you're on the SAVE plan currently, you have to get off of it. The Department of Education has said that July 1st will start the 90-day deadline, at the end of which you have to have switched into another plan. So they shared that you should receive some form of communication from your student loan servicer on or after July 1st that will tell you on July 1st, we started a 90-day counter, and by the time this 90-day counter has ended, which would be October 1st, I believe, you had to have chosen a new plan. And if you haven't chosen a new plan, we are going to automatically put you into either the Repayment Assistance Plan or the newly created Tiered Standard Plan. Now, the myth comes into play because they said that July 1st started that counter, but there are many people out there, especially people whose loan servicer is Mohila, who have gotten letters in advance of July 1st that seem very urgent, telling them, oh, you have to switch, the deadline is approaching, and it's making it seem like July 1st has been pushed up, right? Like, oh, I thought I had 90 days after July 1st, but I keep getting this letter. They're telling me I have to switch now. That is not true. It's a fear-mongering letter. I think it's absolutely ridiculous that they sent it. It has not changed the deadline. The Department of Education has reinforced that deadline in writing. So you will still, regardless of whatever letter you got from your servicer, have 90 days starting July 1st to choose choose a different repayment plan. Now, does that mean you should wait? Probably not. But does it mean that you have to do it earlier than you plan to because of the letter you receive? No, doesn't mean that either. Next is not busting a myth, it's actually an update, and it has to do with people who are trying to get on the pay-as-you-earn plan. So there are people out there who had the pay-as-you-earn plan, they switched to the save plan in order to save money, then save went on forbearance, and now that save is ending, they're wanting to get back on to the pay-as-you-earn plan because it's the most cost-effective option that they're eligible for. There was a brief period where the Department of Education was saying that they may not allow that. I'm not going to get into the details because they've now been made irrelevant, but there was all these things where they were saying essentially if you're on the pay plan switched off, you can't get back on in certain cases. They have clarified, or I should say updated that guidance to say there are no restrictions on people who are trying to get back onto the pay-as-you-earn plan as long as they were generally eligible. Generally eligible for pay means that you were considered a new borrower on or after October 1st, 2007, and you also have to have had a new loan disbursed on or after October 1st, 2011. So as long as you meet those metrics, you don't have to worry about them saying, oh, you're not allowed back in. The only scenario where they shouldn't allow you back in is if you don't have a partial hardship. Pay is a plan that still does require a partial financial hardship in order to enter the plan. Partial financial hardship, as a refresher, means that if you're on this plan, you are saving money by being on pay-as-you-earn as compared to paying your loans under the 10-year standard plan. For example, if the 10-year standard plan required you to pay $500 a month, you can only enter into the pay-as-you-earn plan if you can prove that being on that plan would allow you to pay less than $500 per month. Now, if you're already on the pay-as-you-earn plan and your income keeps increasing and down the line, your payment on that plan would have jumped over the 10-year standard option, you get to stay on the plan. They don't kick you out. What they do is they drop your payment down to the 10-year standard amount, but you continue receiving credit towards pay-as-you-earn and public service loan forgiveness if eligible. Staying on the thread of partial financial hardship, prior to some of these changes, the income-based repayment plan also required a partial financial hardship. Because of this winnowing down of the payment plans under the income-driven repayment plan umbrella, they have removed the partial financial hardship requirement from IBR. Now, this is becoming something that's a myth because there are people out there who were still denied when they tried to get back on the IBR plan, and they're telling other people, oh no, that partial financial hardship is still there and you can't get in. That's not accurate. What was happening was it took a while for the Department of Education and student loan servicers to update their systems to process applications for IBR without that partial financial hardship on there. And during that period, before they were ready, there were people who applied for IBR and were denied. If that happened to you, you are now eligible. You can go back and submit a new application for IBR, and you should not be turned away because of a lack of partial financial hardship. The next point of clarification, not a myth, is what type of credit do you get or retain or lose if you're switching from one income-driven repayment plan to the other. This one is important for you to understand if you're at all considering the Repayment Assistance Plan. So here's how it works. If you're on any of the income-driven repayment plans besides Repayment Assistance Plan, and you have already received some credit towards forgiveness, if you decide down the line to switch to Repayment Assistance Plan, you will not lose your credit towards general forgiveness under these options, nor will you lose your credit towards public service loan forgiveness. As an example, if you are on the pay-as-you-earn plan, by 2028, we know that that plan is going to be phased out. When it phases out, if you switch to Repayment Assistance Plan, you will bring all of your forgiveness credit with you. Now, here's the interesting point. Let's say that you get on Repayment Assistance Plan and down the line you decide to leave Repayment Assistance Plan and go on to one of the other options. Maybe you go from Repayment Assistance Plan onto the IBR plan. It doesn't work in reverse for general forgiveness under income-driven repayment. As an example, if you had 12 years worth of forgiveness credits on Repayment Assistance Plan and you decide to switch on to the new version of income-based repayment, you would lose your general forgiveness credits when you make that switch. However, and this is insane to me, As I read it, you don't lose your access towards public service loan forgiveness credits if you're pursuing it. So in a different version of that example, let's say that we have someone who has 7 years worth of credit towards both general forgiveness and public service loan forgiveness, and they're using the Repayment Assistance Plan. They decide to switch to the income-based repayment plan. They would lose those years of credit towards general forgiveness, but they would maintain their credits that they brought over for public service loan forgiveness. This next one, not a myth, but a huge point of clarification that I want you to understand in terms of your options post July 1st. You're aware by this point that the number of repayment plan options available under income-driven repayment will eventually only be income-based repayment plan and repayment assistance plan. The point of clarification is that's for existing borrowers who do not take out a new loan after July 1st. So if you have existing loans and you're deciding between IBR and repayment assistance plan, you'll always have access to income-based repayment. However, if you take out even one loan after July 1st, you're now stuck with repayment assistance plan. In addition, if you're a Parent Plus borrower and you've done all the steps that I've told you about before July 1st to preserve your eligibility for IDR and public service loan forgiveness with your current Parent Plus loans, you're fine. If you take out a single Parent Plus loan after July 1st, you do not have access to income-driven repayment plans or public service loan forgiveness. So again, be very, very careful. The next myth we're going to bust has to do with borrowing limits. So I think, as I said before the break, the new borrowing limits are absolutely ridiculous. That said, there's a lot of people who have already started their studies who are worried that they're not going to be able to borrow as much as needed to get through the program. Don't have to worry about that. If you have already enrolled in your program, you are exempt from the new borrowing limits. It's only those who are starting a new program after the deadline who have to worry about it. Next is not a point of clarification or busting a myth. It's a point of hope. And this is for people who are either pursuing a graduate degree and you're concerned about the borrowing limits, especially if you're a graduate student and not a quote unquote professional student. And also for those who are pursuing public service loan forgiveness and concerned that maybe your employer might be deemed ineligible. The point of comfort that I would have or hope I would give you is that there are currently a number of lawsuits pending, definitely for public service loan forgiveness, to say that the Department of Education does not have the authority to decide which program or which nonprofit does and doesn't count for public service loan forgiveness. That is overtly political, as the lawsuits state. And the Education Department is in court on multiple fronts, and the predictions are that they're going to lose those lawsuits and be forbidden from restricting eligibility based on a nonprofit that's doing something that the president doesn't agree with. For those who are pursuing graduate degrees, there's also a lawsuit for the Department of Education that was filed on behalf of an association of nurses. And if you remember the list that I gave you, nurses are considered a graduate program, not a professional program, saying that they're being harmed by these lower borrowing limits, and they are fighting to have these caps increased on behalf of all who are pursuing graduate degrees. Do I think that the nurses have as strong a case in that second lawsuit as those arguing about public service loan forgiveness? Maybe not, but who knows what the future holds. And I would also tell you as a reminder that when it comes to these rules and legislation, anything that you hear is permanent is not really permanent. It can all be undone by an act of Congress. So if you're seeing something that concerns you, seeing something that harms you, that's the power of letting your representatives know, whether Republican or Democrat. That's also the power of showing up to vote, because with a different House, with a different Senate, you can have many of these things reversed, changed, or altered. So that's my encouragement to you in advance of this upcoming voting season. Whether you're an Escape Student Loan Debt listener or a New Money, New Problems listener, I hope that this episode was informative. For our Escape Student Loan Debt listeners, we'll be back in 2 weeks with a new episode to help you have your student loans forgiven, reduced, reorganized, or expedited. And if you're in our New Money, New Problems community, I'll be right back here next week. See you then. From Escape Student Loan Debt, this was the Escape Student Loan Debt Podcast, a show for established professionals whose student loan payments or loan balances are impacting their marriage, their business, their credit, or their dream of achieving homeownership.